He was already sitting at the table when I walked in, Derek Stroud. My wife's new friend. Candlelight. 2 glasses. And a smirk that said he thought I'd just turn around and leave. He leaned in and said, "Back off, old man. I'm Franklin. I'm 63. I don't raise my voice, and I don't throw punches, not anymore." But that night, I realized silence doesn't mean surrender. What would you have done if your wife brought you to dinner, just to let another man tell you to walk away from your own life? Tell me below, have you ever been underestimated because you chose dignity over drama? Franklin didn't expect a candlelit table. He expected a conversation. What he got was a quiet execution. The Hollow Creek Diner hadn't changed much in the 20 years since Franklin had first brought Marla there. The booths still had their slightly torn red vinyl cushions. The same yellowed menu board above the register promised the same bottomless coffee and homemade pie. Even the scent, that warm blend of cinnamon, coffee, and old fryer oil, wrapped around him like a memory he didn't want to admit still had power. Last Thanksgiving, Franklin had spent the better part of the morning slow roasting a turkey. He'd made stuffing from scratch, mashed the potatoes with garlic and cream just how Marla liked, and even set out the good plates. She'd smiled, distractedly, said thank you, and scrolled through her phone half the meal. This year, no turkey. No plans. Just a terse text, "Meet me at the diner. We need to talk." He had expected maybe counseling. Maybe a plea. Maybe even a goodbye. But he hadn't expected Derek Stroud. The man was already seated when Franklin walked in, elbows spread, back slouched into the corner of the booth, wearing a tight black sweater that looked 2 sizes too small. Derek was all gym and grin, his confidence so loud it nearly drowned out Nat King Cole crooning from the jukebox. And Marla was sitting beside him. Not across from him, not in some neutral position, but beside him. Her hand rested on the table far too close to Derek's. She looked up as Franklin approached and smiled like they were all old friends. He stood for a second, unsure whether to turn around or step forward. Nora, the waitress, caught his eye from the counter and gave a soft, sympathetic smile. She was already pouring the cider. She didn't ask if he wanted it. Marla gestured to the empty seat across from them. "Franklin. Thanks for coming. You remember Derek, don't you?" He knew the name. Everyone in Hollow Creek did. Derek had been the town's high school quarterback 35 years ago, and he still walked around like the glory never ended. Now he owned a fitness center just outside town and gave nutrition advice like gospel. Franklin eased into the seat slowly, jaw tightening. His fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table, the only sign of tension on an otherwise composed face. Derek leaned forward, voice smooth but lacking warmth. "Let's not make this complicated, man. We're not kids. You deserve honesty." Franklin didn't respond. His eyes flicked to Marla. She didn't look away. Derek continued, "We've been seeing each other for a while. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And now it's out there." Still, Franklin said nothing. The diner's holiday wreaths reflected in the window behind Derek's head, green and gold shimmering slightly in the warmth of the lights. "You can be angry," Derek added, "but here's the deal. You can walk away with your dignity. Or you can make a scene." Marla reached for her cider. Her hand was steady. Derek's tone hardened just slightly. "You don't want this to get messy." Franklin finally looked at him. Not down. Not away. Right into his eyes. "You're mistaking my stillness for surrender," he said, calmly. The silence that followed was heavier than any blow. Even Derek seemed to hesitate, shifting his weight. Nora appeared just then, placing a slice of apple pie in front of Franklin with a gentle nod. He hadn't ordered it. She knew he wouldn't eat it. But some rituals were worth keeping, even if just for dignity's sake. Franklin stood. He pulled a 20 from his coat pocket, smoothed it on the table, and placed a neatly folded napkin on top. Inside was a short thank you note to Nora. He didn't glance back at Marla. He didn't touch the pie. As he stepped outside, the December air met him like a slap. Snow dusted the sidewalks, soft and fresh. His breath fogged in front of him. For a long moment, he stood still beneath the diner's yellow lights. His reflection in the window was faint, overlaid with the image of Marla and Derek still sitting inside, still warm, still unaware that something in him had just shifted. This wasn't rage. Rage burned hot and fast. This was something colder. More focused. The kind of stillness you see in winter rivers, slow, heavy, deliberate. He didn't look back. Outside, beneath snow-dusted lights, Franklin whispers to himself, "This isn't over." But it won't look how you think. Some homes die quietly. Others pretend to be alive just long enough to fool you. Franklin stepped through the front door, and the house met him not with chaos or shouting, but with a silence that felt staged. Like it was holding its breath. The lights were low but on, the heater humming in the corner like it always did in winter, and the smell of roasted carrots and something chicken-like still lingered faintly in the air. It should have felt familiar. Instead, it felt like walking into a set someone else had dressed. He closed the door behind him and stood there, coat still on, scanning the space. On the counter were 2 wine glasses. One had lipstick. Neither were his. The dinner plate sat in the sink, rinsed but not washed, and next to them, a folded cloth napkin, ironed. Marla hadn't ironed a napkin in years. The fire flickered weakly in the gas heater, casting long shadows along the wall. Franklin moved through the house slowly, without turning on any new lights. He wasn't afraid. He just didn't want to disturb the lie it was trying to tell. Upstairs, the bed was made tight as a hotel room, corners tucked, pillows stacked evenly. It was the kind of precision that didn't come from routine. It came from anticipation. He leaned close and inhaled. Her perfume still lingered faintly on the pillowcase, but something else clung underneath, sharper, more chemical. A man's cologne, but not one Franklin owned. Or ever would. He sat on the edge of the bed, unmoving. His hands rested on his thighs, the cold from outside still working its way through his sleeves. The room held its breath with him. In the quiet, his mind didn't race. It just arranged. Observed. Labeled. Accepted. He stood again and walked to her vanity. Neat, too neat. No stray bobby pins, no half-used creams left open. Every brush aligned. He pulled open the small drawer she rarely used and found nothing but a folded receipt. A hotel. 2 nights. Derek's initials co-signed on the reservation line. He stared at it without blinking. The paper didn't burn in his hand. It didn't demand destruction. It just confirmed what the diner hadn't finished saying. He moved downstairs. The coffee pot was still warm, but untouched. He switched it off without a word. On the wall near the dining nook, their wedding photo remained. Marla wore soft curls then, and Franklin's hair was more salt than silver. He stared at the picture. No tears came. Only a dull pressure behind his ribs, as though his body was trying to figure out what to feel and had chosen silence as a default. In the pantry, pushed behind a forgotten jar of molasses and a broken ice cream scoop, he found it, the old radio. Dusty, neglected. The one he'd given her on their first Christmas as husband and wife, wrapped in too much gold paper, with a ribbon she saved for years. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, then returned it to the shelf. Not everything needed reclaiming. In the den, he opened the drawer beneath the couch and pulled out a small duffel. Nothing fancy. Just his things. 2 pairs of pants. Flannel shirts. The blue sweater she used to say brought out his eyes. Socks, toothbrush, razor. Methodical. No rush. Just clarity. Before he left, he paused in the kitchen, pulled a notepad from the drawer near the fridge, and wrote in firm, steady letters. You chose noise. I choose quiet. He placed the note where she'd find it, beside the stove, beneath the ceramic salt pig shaped like a chicken they'd picked up in Vermont. For some reason, he didn't want to move it. It still made her laugh once. Outside, the air had shifted. Snow had started again, fine powder dancing beneath the street lamps. As he reached the bottom step of the porch, a quiet creak sounded from next door. Mr. Cal Turner stood on his own porch, wrapped in a thick robe, cup of something steaming in hand. He didn't speak. Just nodded once, slow and full, as though he'd known long before Franklin had. Franklin nodded back. Nothing needed to be said. The truth had a way of traveling quietly in towns like Hollow Creek. He stepped off the porch and walked around the side of the house, not toward the front driveway, but to the gate that led to the back alley. His boots left clean impressions in the untouched snow, each step deliberate. The duffel bounced lightly at his side, the zipper clinking now and then like a distant chime. As he passed the workshop, he paused. The light was still on inside. His father's toolbox sat just where he'd left it years ago, beneath the pegboard that hadn't held new tools in over a decade. He almost opened the door, just to touch the wood again, to anchor himself. But instead, he looked once, softly, then kept walking. His phone buzzed just as he reached the gate. He pulled it from his coat pocket. A single message lit the screen. "You done being dramatic yet?" He stared at it for a long while, thumb hovering. But he didn't type anything back. He didn't need to. They thought Franklin was quiet because he was weak. He was quiet because he listened. The garage smelled like old rubber, winter salt, and gasoline, the same mix it always had since Hollow Creek first needed an auto shop. Snow flurries drifted past the frosted windows, casting soft halos around the tools hanging on the pegboard. The back office was warmer, cluttered but comfortable, and the coffee pot gurgled in the corner like it had nowhere else to be. Franklin sat across from Eddie Malone, who wore the same flannel he'd probably owned since his cop days. Eddie had always been the type who didn't ask questions unless he already knew the answers. Today, he just sipped from his chipped mug that read retired, not tired, and waited. "I'm not looking for trouble," Franklin said, his voice steady. "Just truth." Eddie nodded slowly, setting his mug down. "That why you're not yelling?" Franklin gave a faint smile. "You ever known me to yell?" Eddie chuckled. "Fair point. But people don't usually come here with that look on their face unless they're about to blow something up." "I'm not," Franklin said. "At least not loudly." Eddie leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers across his stomach. "Tell me how deep this goes." Franklin didn't lay it all out. Just the shape of it. The diner. The necklace. The wine glasses. The hotel receipt. Derek Stroud. Marla's silence that had grown louder than any argument they'd ever had. Eddie listened like a man filing cabinets in his mind. When Franklin finished, Eddie stood, moved to the file cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a folder marked Public Records, Leases. He laid it on the desk without fanfare. "Derek's been sloppy," Eddie said. "Co-signed a lease for a downtown apartment last month. Not his primary residence. Hotel bookings too. One of M's under Marla's old initials, MHG. I checked dates. They line up with the school fundraiser weekend she told everyone she was at." Franklin stared at the pages, but didn't reach for them. "You kept all this?" "I keep a lot of things," Eddie said. "Sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge." The door jangled suddenly. They both turned as Sadie Garner stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. She looked surprised to see Franklin, then almost relieved. "Didn't expect to find both of you in the same room," she said gently. Franklin stood. "Afternoon, Sadie." She nodded, eyes soft. "I don't mean to interrupt. I just needed to drop something off." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, slightly worn at the edges. "Marla wrote this. A while ago. Never sent it. I found it when she asked me to help clean out her study drawer last spring." Franklin hesitated. "Why give it to me now?" Sadie looked at him squarely. "Because I think you deserve the full picture. And because I think you'll know what to do with it." He took the envelope, held it loosely in his hand. Didn't open it. Thank you. She nodded again and left as quietly as she came. Eddie slid open a drawer and retrieved a small USB. He held it between two fingers like it weighed more than it should. This is everything I could find. Hotel logs, financial transfers, Derek's gym business registration, guess who invested under a maiden name. Franklin didn't flinch. He just took the USB and pocketed it like it was a loose coin. You gonna blow it all up? Eddie asked, voice low. Franklin's eyes were calm. No. Just gonna light one small candle, and let truth do the rest. He stayed a few more minutes, talking softly with Eddie about nothing in particular. Weather. Snow tires. The high school team's losing streak. Then he left, stepping out into the drifting flurries, the envelope still unopened in his coat pocket, the USB pressing against his side. Back at the house, the one that still technically belonged to both him and Marla, he didn't turn on the overhead light. He set his keys down, hung his coat, and stood by the window watching snow collect on the banister. On the porch, he noticed something wrapped in foil in a cloth napkin. He opened the door and found a still warm loaf of cornbread sitting silently, the note beneath it written in careful print. Thought you could use something real tonight. Cal. Franklin didn't smile. But something in his shoulders dropped half an inch. He stepped inside, set the loaf on the kitchen counter, then walked to the nightstand. He placed the USB beside the small stack of books he hadn't touched in weeks. He didn't plug it in. He didn't open the envelope. Instead, he walked to the pantry, reached behind the molasses, and pulled out the old radio. He wiped off the dust with his sleeve, clicked it on. It crackled at first, a static-like memory. Then, soft jazz filled the room, floating low and smooth, notes lingering like ghosts that knew they were welcome. Franklin sat in the armchair, closed his eyes, and just listened. In small towns, secrets don't need to be shouted. They just pass between coffee cups and raised eyebrows. Snow had fallen just enough to soften the sounds of Hollow Creek. Tires made no complaint on the slush-lined streets, and conversations slipped quietly between porch railings and shop windows. Franklin walked with his coat buttoned to the top, gloved hands tucked into his pockets, not in a hurry to get anywhere. He didn't need to be. The post office sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth, a squat brick building wrapped in garland and blinking white lights. Inside, the heater rattled like it had been doing since the Nixon administration. A few neighbors stood near the counter, chatting more with each other than with the postal clerk. Franklin nodded to them politely as he approached the bulletin board, pretending to read while listening. Heard she's already calling him her partner, one woman whispered, her voice thick with curiosity more than judgment. Not even divorced yet. Oh, honey, the other replied, they've been walking hand in hand since Halloween. I seen it at Murphy's grocery. Franklin didn't turn. Just stared at the yellowing flyer for the Hollow Creek High School Alumni Winter Gathering, December 17th, Community Hall. There was a time when he would have smiled at the thought. Now, it just reminded him of what it felt like to be 14 again. Outmatched. Unspoken for. As he stepped back into the snowy light, he caught a glimpse of a familiar truck idling across the street. Derek. Leaning against the side, sunglasses on, arms crossed like he was posing for something. Franklin didn't pause. He turned his collar against the cold and made his way toward the hand-painted sign of Whitman's Books and Things. Inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. The warmth wrapped around him immediately, cinnamon, paper, the faint hum of an old heater struggling to keep up. Shelves curved around the shop like a library that had forgotten its edges, and behind the counter stood Joanne Whitman. She looked up, eyes twinkling. Franklin Hale, she said, not surprised. Still drawing trees on napkins? He gave a small smile. I think the napkins were the only things listening. Joanne chuckled, reaching for the kettle behind the counter. Still take cider the same way? Few things worth changing. She poured him a cup, handed it over with both hands. Her fingers were lined, but warm. I heard, she said gently. I know, he replied. They sat near the back, among stacks of books that hadn't moved in weeks. She didn't press. Just sipped her cider and looked at him the way only librarians know how, like she was cataloging the invisible weight he carried. You know, she said eventually, Derek was a storm in a football jersey. Always looking for a wall to crash into. Franklin stared at the steam rising from his cup. And I was the wall. She smiled sadly. But you never cracked. Just absorbed the hit and kept walking. He thought about that. About lockers and hallway sneers. About how he'd never once fought back, but remembered everything. Didn't feel like strength at the time, he said. Joanne tilted her head. You weren't weak back then. Just surrounded by noise too loud to hear your strength. Outside, the jingle of Derek's keys broke the moment. They watched through the window as he got into his truck and drove away, never glancing toward the shop. Joanne didn't say anything. Neither did Franklin. But something settled between them in that silence. Franklin stood after a while, thanked her, and reached for the second cup of cider she'd quietly poured and capped. For Mr. Turner, she said. He nodded. He still likes it warm. She smiled. He still likes most things quiet. As Franklin stepped outside, the cold touched his cheeks like a familiar sigh. He walked slowly through the snowy path that led to Mr. Turner's porch. The boards creaked under his boots, and the wind made the wreath on the door tremble softly. But the rocking chair was empty. The porch light was off. He stood there for a moment, cider cup in hand, looking at the space where the old man usually sat with his blanket and quiet nods. Then, slowly, Franklin placed the cup down beside the door and stepped back into the stillness. Some fights are won with fists. Others with folders, and the courage to open them in silence. The room was quiet, almost reverent in the way only law offices can be when everyone knows the truth but no one said it yet. 2 chairs. 1 wooden table. A single window overlooking Main Street, where the wind rattled the last of the dry leaves against the sidewalk. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but it was close, the kind of stillness that came before weather broke its silence. Franklin sat straight, coat buttoned, fingers resting gently on the edge of the table. Across from him, Marla wore a navy blazer and a gloss too dark for daylight. Her hands were folded, her wedding band conspicuously absent. She looked polished, professional. Controlled. Charles King, the mediator, cleared his throat. We're here today to discuss final terms. I expect courtesy. Civility. And, above all, clarity. Marla offered a crisp nod. Of course. Franklin said nothing. Just reached into his bag and placed a manila envelope on the table. It made no sound when it landed, but the weight of it filled the room. Marla's eyes dropped to it, then flipped back up to his face. What's that? Charles opened it carefully, pulling out documents one by one. Printed screenshots, bank transfers, hotel receipts with timestamps, lease agreements with Derek Stroud's name scribbled confidently beside hers. Charles's brows tightened. Some of these accounts were joint. Others hidden under your maiden name. That may fall under misrepresentation, Mrs. Hale. Marla's jaw set, but her voice remained measured. You've been spying on me? Franklin didn't flinch. No. Just documenting what was already abandoned. She looked away, out the window, then back again. You've always been dramatic when hurt. I've always been quiet when disappointed, he said. You just never listen long enough to know the difference. Charles tapped his pen against the lease page. This isn't a trial, but these documents complicate claims of financial dependency. Mr. Hale is within rights to deny spousal support. Marla folded her arms. So what? You want to ruin me? No, Franklin said gently. I'm offering you the cleanest exit you'll ever get. Charles looked between them. Franklin, can you state your terms for the record? Franklin didn't look at either of them when he spoke. No alimony. No shared assets beyond what she's already moved. She keeps her name. I keep my peace. Marla's voice wavered. You think you're noble. But all you're doing is punishing me without raising your voice. He turned to her, calm and steady. You asked me to meet you for dinner. What you did was serve a funeral and call it closure. She looked smaller now. Like her heels weren't giving her as much height as she needed. Why are you doing this? Franklin's answer came without hesitation. Because I remember who I was before I became who you needed me to be. Charles set down his pen and leaned back. You're calmer than most. That usually means you've already let go. Franklin stood, buttoned his coat, and nodded. I have. Marla didn't say another word. She didn't have to. The silence in the room had already chosen sides. As Franklin stepped outside, the air hit him with that pre-snow sharpness. The cold slid down his collar, but he didn't pull it tighter. His phone buzzed. A message from Eddie. He's been using your name at the gym, Frank. You should see this. He didn't take anything from her. He simply stopped giving away parts of himself. The rental cabin sat at the edge of Hollow Creek, its porch facing a quiet grove where the trees held snow like secrets. A soft dusk had begun to settle, casting everything in that blue hush just before night takes hold. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and inside, the fireplace flickered steady, sending a glow across pine-paneled walls and a kitchen that smelled faintly of ginger and warm bread. Franklin stood near the window, a mug in hand, watching snowflakes drift sideways in the wind. He'd lit the fire an hour ago, just after rereading Sadie's letter. One line still lingered in his chest like a pulse. I never dared speak up. But I saw you. I always saw you. The knock came soft, polite, no urgency. He opened the door to find Joanne Whitman wrapped in a thick scarf, cheeks flushed, a paper bag cradled in her arms. I brought 2 things, she said. One's edible. One's audible. He stepped aside, letting her in with a nod. She moved easily, like she'd done it before, like she belonged in quiet spaces. She set the bag on the table and pulled out a still warm loaf of bread, then a small rectangular bundle wrapped in cloth. When she unwrapped it, Franklin's breath caught slightly. It was the old radio. Cleaned, polished. The dial glass no longer clouded. She plugged it in, turned the knob gently. A pause. Then the soft crackle. Then jazz, low, warm, like a voice leaning in close just to say, "You're still here." Joanne didn't comment. She just set down an envelope beside the bread. From Cal, she said. Left it with the nurse. Told her to get it to you once the snow came. Franklin took it carefully, sat in the old wooden chair by the fire. The envelope was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. Inside was a short note in Cal Turner's unmistakable neat hand. Frank. Don't let the good ones pass twice. Cornbread was just an excuse. Now go listen to something besides your thoughts. Cal. Franklin folded the note, pressing it flat between his fingers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Joanne poured cider into 2 mugs. She handed one to him without asking how he took it. They sat at the table, the radio humming between them, the bread between cooling and still warm. Neither reached for it. Joanne glanced at the shelf above the fireplace, where a slim volume of poetry rested between a field guide and a forgotten recipe book. You know, she said, Dickinson was right. Some things that fly are only meant to land once. She opened the book gently, found the page without needing to flip. Her voice was quiet but clear as she read. Hope is the thing with feathers. That perches in the soul. And sings the tune without the words. And never stops, at all. Franklin closed his eyes. He didn't imagine the past. He didn't picture the house he left or the woman who once lived there. He didn't try to rebuild what had collapsed quietly and completely. He just listened. The fire popped gently. Outside, the snow began to fall heavier, sticking now to the railings and the gravel path. Inside, it smelled like pine needles and the kind of bread only a bookstore owner would bother to knead by hand. Joanne's hand rested near his on the table. Not touching. Just near enough. For the first time in a long while, Franklin said softly, "I don't need to explain myself." Joanne smiled, not wide, not bright, just real. She closed the book, set it down beside the radio. "Some stories don't end," she said. "They just rest." The radio hums low. Outside, snow begins to stick. Inside, for once, nothing is missing. Some endings don't come with doors slammed or voices raised. Sometimes, they arrive with quiet music, a clean kitchen, and the gentle weight of someone choosing to stay. Franklin didn't win or lose, he simply stepped out of the noise and reclaimed what had quietly been his all along: dignity, peace, and the right to no longer explain his worth. Because betrayal doesn't define you. How you carry yourself after it does. Like a porch light left on through winter dusk, stillness can become a kind of strength, and kindness, the clearest reply. If this story stirred something in you, maybe pass that stillness on. Someone nearby may be waiting for their moment to quietly begin again.